Yo, welcome to Alpha Omega University. Welcome back to all of you that keep on watching every single episode. I appreciate you guys. If you haven't watched all the episodes, remember I upload them to YouTube. We do have a YouTube channel. If you're on Twitch right now, you can scroll down. There's a link to the YouTube there. The YouTube is AO University. All right, so today we have a change of plans. We were going to do VOD review Monday, right? Like we usually do. But because of the schedule being kind of screwed up, I had decided, and I told you guys previously that I was going to end up doing this episode 9, the Zerg's Armor. I was going to end up just pushing all the episodes back one day, right? But I decided to instead just cut out the VOD review episode for this week, because I want to try to make sure that I get as many of the episodes out to you guys as possible. Because I know that a lot of people are trying to like learn the game and stuff and learn especially the basics and the fundamentals about the game. And so I wanted to make sure I get these at least the first few episodes out as soon as possible, because at the end of the day, I already have plans, right? It's gonna happen at some point. There's only so much you can kind of like teach raw from the game, right? And so after a few months of doing this schedule, what we're going to end up having is we're going to have a time where basically there's only going to be so many other new things I can talk about when it comes to like teaching pre-planned episodes. So in other words, making it simple, at some point, I'm going to start doing less episodes and more VOD review videos, right? More VOD review streams. So because of that, I want to focus on the episodes now, early on, so that we get all of these episodes out, and then that way they're out there, and then people can watch them whenever they want to learn. And then moving forward, we're going to be doing more and more VOD review, but that's looking months down the line, right? So that's the plan, and that's exactly why I chose to do the episode today instead of VOD review. So if you were looking for VOD review today, I'm sorry, but with that being said, I do want to say, starting, so this is episode 9, 10, 11. So starting like episode 12, I think it's episode 12. It's going to be it's going to be talking about like disengaged tanks. It's going to be talking about clump tanks. It's going to be talking about different kinds of DPS and healers, like entire episodes on those specific pieces, right? Of the Zerg. And in those episodes, we will be looking at videos and analyzing some of those videos, right, in those individual episodes for those individual roles, right? Again, we're still kind of staying broad, but now we're sharpening in, right? Last time we looked at in episodes 7 and 8, we were looking at ranged Zergs and melee Zergs and the differences between the two, the meta changes, the pros and the cons, things like that. Today we start a new series. It's going to be 3 episodes. It's going to be the Zerg's Armor, the Zerg's, what is it? The Zerg's Spear and the Zerg's Heart and Shield, right? So the Zerg's Armor today, we're going to be talking about tanks, just tanks. That's it. Just everything about tanks to do with ZvZ, right? I'm going to explain all the different roles that tanks have. There's 4 main ones. So we're going to be talking about clump tanks, disengaged tanks, kite tanks, and scout tanks, right? So those are the four generalization groups that we're going to talk about. And like I said, later on, we're going to have full entire episodes on each one of these. For the Zerg Spear episode, that's the next one. That's going to be on Friday. All right. And Saturday, there's going to be no episode. Saturday is going to be just a skip. We're not going to do a stream on Saturday at all. Right. It's actually my son's birthday. So, we're going to be out. But yeah, so on Friday, we will be doing a stream, and Friday is going to be episode 10. That's going to be the Zerg Spear, and that's going to be talking about DPS. And then the Friday after that, we're going to be talking about the Zerg's Heart and Shield, and that one is going to be talking about healers and supports and their general roles inside ZvZ, right? So that's kind of the outlook for the next week or two, right? And then we're going to move on to individuals. So if you're looking for VOD review, that's going to be next week at this same time on Monday next week. But without further ado, just make sure you guys follow, subscribe if you want to. You don't have to. The content is free at the end of the day, right? But I would like you guys to follow if you guys haven't already. Another thing that you guys can do to help me out, and post the stream to other people, tell other people about the stream. Let's try to get more people involved. Let's try to get more people into the stream as possible, because the goal is ultimately to try to teach as many people as possible, right? So don't try to just be one of those people that's in the shadows, right? Let's bring as many people in as possible. All right, let's get into it. So today, like I said, we're talking about the tank types, right? Zerg's armor is the tank types. So we're going to be going through what type of tanks there are. We're going to define those types of things. I already told you clump, disengage, kite, and scout, right? We're gonna define what the role of those tanks are. We're also going to talk about what kind of weapons fit that role, right? What kind of weapons are related to those roles. And I want you guys to notice there's a key difference here that I said there's clump tanks, there's disengage tanks, there's kite tanks, and there's scout tanks, right? Now, I want you guys to notice that I put a difference between disengage tank and kite tank, right? And I've been alluding to this in the last few episodes when I've been talking about kiting versus disengaging. I haven't necessarily spoken in direct terms so you guys can understand the difference directly, because I was waiting for this episode to explain better what the difference is between disengaged tanks and kite tanks. And there is a major difference, right? We need to stop looking at disengaged tanks and kite tanks as one group, because they're not. They achieve completely different roles, and they usually use very different weapons, very different kits, very different armors. They play differently. They go on the field differently. They move around the field differently. Disengaged tanks and kite tanks are very, very different from each other. So, after that, we're going to also be giving tips about each one of the roles, right? And how, like, kind of little things. They're not anything critical, but they're little tips to kind of make you as a better player when you're playing as a clump tank or as a disengaged tank or whatever it is that you play, right? Just little things that you can kind of work on, right? That way we can slowly progress, because it's very easy to just hear somebody tell you everything of what you should do. It's like, yeah, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, and that's great. But if you don't have like a quick little tip that you got to focus on, so small goals, I should say, small goals, right? If you don't have small goals that you can focus on and get better with, then a lot of times it gets really hard to actually be able to progress little by little, right? If you have too much information. So the first tank type is the clump tank, right? That was super simple. Everybody understands what a clump tank is. I mean, their job is to clump the enemy, and at the same time, it's also to limit the mobility of the enemy, right? That's their secondary role. But the primary role of clump tanks is very simple. You just clump the enemy up, you bring them together in whatever way you can, and that's about it. Limiting the mobility of the enemy is secondary to clump tanks, because you want to be able to try to keep that clumped as long as possible. You don't want them to get out of that clump quickly, and then yeah, sure, you got a great clump, but it didn't stay there for at least a second or two. So then your DPS had no time to hit it, and then it's pointless. It's almost as if you didn't even get a clump, right? Disengaged tank. Again, we understand it very well, but I'm going to explain the differences between disengage and kite, right? So disengage tank is a tank that is meant to suppress or interrupt enemy engages. Okay, so what I'm talking about suppressing or interrupting enemy engages, I'm talking about trying to misdirect the enemy. You're trying to make them either hit slowly or stagger their damage, right? So if your guys get clumped, your Zerg gets clumped, and the enemy comes in with 10 DPS. Let's just say it's a small ZvZ, but let's just say there's 10 DPS that are gonna hit the clump, and your job is not to stop them from hitting. That's not your job at all, right? Your job as a disengaged tank is to make sure that you give your Zerg time to get out of that clump. It's not to actually stop them from engaging on your Zerg. It's just to buy time. Okay? There's a giant difference in that, because a lot of disengaged tanks think, oh no, it's my job to make sure the enemy can't cast anything. Listen, I mean, that's idealistic, right? I mean, if you can ensure that the enemy literally cannot ever cast a single E onto your entire Zerg, and then obviously that's the best, right? But that's really hard to accomplish, even for very, very, very good disengaged tanks. That's really hard to accomplish consistently. And here we want to focus on consistency rather than highlight reels, right? Because highlight reels are they're a one-off, right? It happens right now. It looks great. It looks awesome. But then you don't do anything for a week. And it's like, okay, you're worthless. I mean, if you're doing absolutely nothing for a week and then you have a highlight reel once a week or so, I mean, it's pointless, right? We want to focus on consistency. And so when you want to focus on consistency as a disengaged tank, you want to focus on suppressing or interrupting the enemy engage. And when I talk about interrupting the enemy engage, I am not talking about interrupting their engage as in like interrupting their cast, right? Like if a Brimstone is casting and you go and use like a Judicator helmet and it interrupts their cast, right? Or you stun them or something and it interrupts their cast. That's not what I'm talking about. Right? When I say interrupt the enemy engage, I'm talking about staggering their engage so that if, again, let's go back to the scenario. If 10 enemy DPS are engaging your Zerg, your job is not to stop all of them. Maybe stop 4, 5. That's fine. Because here's what you're going to do. Let's say you stop 5. Okay? You're a Grove Keeper or a Heavy Mace and you stop 5 of them from hitting for like 2 seconds. Right? You stunned them or you slowed them or you snare charged them or you silenced them, whatever you did. But you delayed their actual damage from hitting your Zerg for 2 seconds or even a second and a half. Okay? Now, what you're going to have is the first 5 people that hits, right? The other 5 people that got through you and you didn't actually stop them, they're going to hit their damage on the clump. After they hit their damage, your Zerg's healers have the time to heal that because those 5 people on their own cannot kill your clump, right? So your Zerg is going to be able to heal that or put defensives down and survive it. And then after another second and a half, they're back up to full HP and they're spreading out because you gave them time. And the second wave, which is the 5 people that you stopped and you delayed, they come in and hit the clump as well, right? Now, it might seem like a second and a half is not a big deal, but I promise you a second and a half is the difference between a Fallen hitting a person and that person living, and then that person getting hit by the rest of the DPS versus that person just getting hit by everything and melted instantly before the Fallen E even drops, right? So often we like to blame healers. It's like, oh, healer, you didn't heal fast enough. And it's like, well, most of the time it's that the disengaged tanks just didn't buy enough time, right? Because the Fallen has a cast time and then it drops and it takes a second. And it's a great heal. It's amazing. But you have to buy time. You have to stagger the enemy's engage. So that's the primary purpose of disengaged tanks. Here's the thing. For disengaged tanks, there's one thing that is very, very important. A lot of times I get people asking me questions about disengaged tanks and they're asking me like basically what should they do, what should they focus on. And the truth is as disengaged tanks, your job, like I said, is to suppress or interrupt the enemy engage, right? Stagger them, right? But beyond that, your also job is to make sure if ever possible that the enemy does not hit your Zerg and rather hit something else. And if that something else is you, then you did your job. I can't tell you how many times I, as a disengaged tank, get on the face of the enemy and they get annoyed by me or whatever, and they decide to full engage on me. Listen, sometimes they kill me, sometimes they don't. But no matter what, they engaged me instead of engaging my Zerg. So I just bought my entire Zerg 1 minute of time. And why do I calculate that 1 minute? So think about it. If they're engaging every 30 seconds, and then after 30 seconds, they engage the Zerg. And then after 30 seconds, they engage me, just me. That's 30 seconds that I bought, right? And then 30 more seconds for their cooldowns to get ready again. So I just bought a whole minute of time for my Zerg. just because the enemy decided to engage just me instead of engage my Zerg. So this is what I'm talking about, misdirecting the enemy. Becomes so annoying and so unignorable, right? I know that's not a word, but you guys understand what I'm saying, right? Like, they can't ignore you. As a disengaged tank, they just can't ignore you because you're constantly annoying them and you're constantly in their face and you're constantly doing things to stop them from doing what they want to do. Let's say they just want to walk down a choke. Let's just say they just want to walk down a choke and you decide, no, you're not going to walk down that choke because I said so, right? And you just decide to snare charge them or on the choke for whatever reason. Let's say your Zerg doesn't even hit it or anything. It's just, you just decided to snare charge them then. That gets on people's nerves. Just the fact that they can't just naturally walk around and relax. That's what's going to cause them to get upset with you as a disengaged tank and want to full engage you. Now, when I say they engage you, and even if they kill you or they don't kill you, that's still good. It's not always good. I want you guys to pay attention. If you're a disengaged tank and you're overextended and you're by yourself and the enemy has nowhere near to hitting your Zerg, they are not threatening your Zerg at all, then suddenly you just baited yourself because you're not protecting anything. They weren't going to engage your Zerg in the first place. Right? So you have to always stay close to your Zerg no matter what. If you can bait them to engage you instead of your Zerg, many times what will happen is they engage you and then your Zerg will counter onto them because you end up taking all the damage and the rest of your Zerg is alive. I've won many fights like that. Whether I end up living or dying, I mean, it doesn't matter. But so many times a whole Zerg will engage me, and then the rest of my Zerg, who took literally no damage, counter engages on the enemy and kills everything because they overextended themselves for one person. They have no cooldowns. They wasted everything on one person. But if you're far away, none of that matters, right? So those are the things for this engaged tank. Now, kite tanks are totally different. And this is where we need to separate the two, disengage and kite, right? Kite tanks are not necessarily supposed to stagger the enemy engage. They're supposed to stagger the enemy movement. Okay, so remember how I said disengaged tank suppresses and interrupts the enemy engage. But their secondary role for disengaged tank is doing things like I said, like you just snare charge or choke or something. Don't let them walk around for free, right? That's the difference between disengage and kite. Kite tanks, that's their primary job. And their secondary job is trying to disrupt the enemy engages. But the truth is, kite tanks, the most important part for kite tanks is that they are constantly able to stagger the enemy's movement rather than stagger their engages. Okay? What this does is that it adds a layer to the defense network of the Zerg. If you think about this, the very first tank that an enemy Zerg should encounter, or actually the very first player that the enemy Zerg should encounter, will be the scout. Then the second person that they will encounter should be a kite tank. The third person they encounter should be a disengaged tank. And within that area, there should be the caller. And behind them should be the clump tanks. Right, so think of the positioning of a Zerg's defense of the Zerg's armor, right? Like I called it today. This is why I called the episode the Zerg's armor, because the armor has different layers to it. Okay, it's not just the tanks front line. They all just do the same thing. No. We need to get away from visualizing the field in that black or white manner. Okay, there is a lot more depth to this. And if you position your Zerg appropriately, you're going to do so much better. Think about this. The kite tanks are supposed to reduce the enemy's ability to move around. But how are they going to accomplish that? They have to accomplish that through having superior speed themselves. So kite tanks prefer to have more speed, while disengaged tanks prefer to have more survivability. This is why, and I've played Grail Seeker and I've played Heavy Mace. I've played a lot of different weapons, right? But those two weapons are perfect examples, right? Disengaged tank would be Heavy Mace, whereas Kite tank would be Grail Seeker. Okay, now when I play Grail Seeker, I usually run a sprint, so some kind of sprint boots. okay? Because I need the mobility. Not only that, Grail Seeker has the cartwheel that gives you mobility, gives you speed boost, right? The W, I usually run stun run, and I know most people like to run other things, but I run stun run because I value the mobility. Okay, so for me, when I play Grail Seeker, I am completely and totally mobile because I'm supposed to, because that's what the focus of a kite tank is supposed to be. You're supposed to be so far into the enemy that you're stopping them from moving as they want to. You're stopping them from rotating. You're stopping them from doing anything that they would like to do, period. Right? Whereas Disengaged Tank, when I play Disengaged Tank, I wear Guardian Boots. Right? And I know that most people don't like Guardian Boots. Personally, I think they're amazing for Disengaged Tanks. But at the end of the day, what I'm saying is I don't use a sprint at all. I mean, Guardian Boots have a 25% speed boost for 8 seconds. I mean, that's really, really low, right? It's really not a lot. Because I value more on survivability as a disengaged tank. Because disengaged tank, you're constantly going to go into the enemy while the enemy is engaging. And if you have like questions about how that's done or whatever, most of the time that I play as heavy mace, especially recently in the past like year or so. I've been playing heavy mace, and you guys can go on my personal YouTube channel. It's Kelron114. Okay, I have videos uploaded there playing heavy mace. You guys can see every single time the enemy engages, I jump right into the enemy. Okay, and because I jump right into the enemy, this is the job, by the way. This is what you're supposed to do as a disengaged tank. It's not like I'm doing anything outside the norm or I'm doing anything great. I'm just doing my job as a disengaged tank, right? But if I was playing Grail Seeker and I was playing a kite tank, I wouldn't be doing that. I wouldn't just be launching myself into the enemy. In fact, once the enemy is actually already engaging as a kite tank, there's not a lot you can do. You're kind of almost useless at that point. You have to do everything before they actually engage. So the last tank type is scout tanks, right? So scout tanks, scout tanks are very versatile, okay? But here's the one thing that you do need with a scout tank. You need to have speed, and you need to have a little bit of survivability. Not a lot, but a little bit, at least a little bit, okay? Scout tank, usually you want to have somebody that's like a Grail Seeker would be good, Icicle would be good, anything that has speed, mobility, or some sort of blink. Why? Because scouts very often, especially nowadays, compared to years back, man. And if you guys don't know, I've been scouting for years, man. Right? So scouting has never been harder than it is today. Okay, like I'm not saying it's hard as hell. I'm just saying it's never been as hard to scout as it is today. And the reason for it is because so many Zergs in the entire game nowadays understand how important it is to actually kill scouts, because information and scouting information, battlefield information, has always been incredibly important. I've said this before, right? It's always been importantly important, but people understand the importance of it more now than they used to. Because of that, many Zergs will full engage on scouts very, very, very often. Okay, I used to die a lot as scouting and stuff, but that's because I was learning. But nowadays, I don't die as much, but I can tell you I can't scout as well as I used to, because I used to be able to run inside the enemy, walk around, do whatever the hell I want, mounted of course, but do whatever the hell I want and give all kinds of info during the entire fight. And the enemy would not once even throw a Q on me. But nowadays, it's like the moment they see me off screen, they'll just dismount and try to kill me, right? And it's not just because it's me, it's any scout, right? Any scout. Scouts die left and right nowadays. It's a dying breed, I guess, right? But what I'm saying is that scouting information is extremely important, but because of that, enemies are very, very likely to try to full engage you. So then as a scout, if they do dismount you, you have to have mobility. Otherwise, they're going to catch you, they're going to kill you. Okay, so mobility is very important with a scout. However, there's a second piece to scouting that is also very, very important. Because you're the scout, you're going to be the first one with the most amount of information on the field. Let's face it, if you're a scout, you see the enemy, you understand everything that they're doing, you're watching them do everything, but you're not feeding every bit of that information to the caller. You're just not, because it'd be impossible, because then you'd just be talking nonstop and be like, they're walking west, they're walking north, they're walking south, they're walking east, right? And it's like, it would be really, really annoying for the rest of the Zerg to just hear a scout nonstop blabber, blah, 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 right? So what scouts need to have is they need to have some way to stop an enemy, or at least delay an enemy from hitting you, such as when you scout an enemy flank coming, let's say you let the caller know, and maybe the caller's like calling engages left and right, and they just can't hear you. I mean, that's happened many times, right? I'm sure every single one of you, I'm sure every single one of you has been there before at some point, right? And so a scout notices it, and so the scout sees, oh damn, like they don't realize, or they're not ready for this flank. They're not ready to protect this flank. So then the scout will dismount as soon as he sees the enemy flank dismount. And then it's gonna be up to the scout to delay them, even if it's 1 second. Delay whatever you can, so that you can buy time for your Zerg. Okay, and I've done this many times. I've done it with Grail Seeker. I've done it with Icicle. I've done it with Heavy Mace. I've done it with Soul Scythe, even though Soul Scythe wasn't as good. But I mean the Soul Scythe E, because they would all run together mounted. And the moment they would dismount, I'd just throw my Soul Scythe on all of them. So they wouldn't be knocked up. I mean, again, it just buys you a second, right? And sometimes that's all you need. But Soul Scythe is not the best for it. I'd say go with the other three. So that's the tank types. That's the 4 tank types. If you guys have any questions about it, drop it in the chat. I am reading Stellar Nova. What's up, man? No, I think I saw your message earlier. When you came in, I think we had just started, like literally a couple minutes before you came in. So you're good, man. All right, so let's get into the clump tanks. Let's look at the specifics of each individual type of tank, right? So let's go back to clump tanks. We're looking at the weapons of the clump tanks first. Then we're going to look at helmets, then chest pieces, and then boots. Finally, we're going to finish off with positioning and the few tips that I told you guys about each individual one, right? So weapons for clump tanks, it's going to be the Hodge, the Hand of Justice, right? Pretty self-explanatory. Again, clump tank is very, very simple to explain. They just got to get the clump. With the Hand of Justice, usually you want to run. Here's the thing, man. The ring is so good, but with Hand of Justice, usually you want to run the dash. And the reason for it is because it gives you much better positioning so that you can get that Hodge E off in a better way. You don't need it. You really don't need it. You can run the ring if you want, and I've seen many people do it successfully, but it's hard. It is a lot harder, right? And if you're a player that's not like very comfortable with the weapon yet, your best bet is to run the dash and learn it that way first. The next weapon is going to be one-handed mace. And give me a second here. We gotta stay hydrated. All right, so the one-handed mace, it's also really, really good for clumping. It has a really good AoE radius. The Hodge actually has a pretty small AoE radius. What the Hodge has that is good is that you can kind of direct it in one direction. Plus, it's instant, right? You don't like. There's no cast. There's no like. You don't see it coming. The only telltale sign that a Hodge is about to use their E is if like they're sprinting directly at your Zerg. But usually that, like, you don't have a lot of time. Okay, you don't have a lot of time. So that's what's the strength of Hodge is that it's very quick. So you can't prevent it most often than not. One-handed mace has a big telltale sign, right? It's the big air compress. I mean, it's pretty freaking big. It's like what, 7 meters? It's pretty big. The thing about it though is that it is pretty fast. And usually what they do is they pop the air compress and then sprint, or they're already sprinting and pop the air compress mid sprint. And what this does is that by the time they get to where they want to actually air compress, the air compress pops and then you get them, right? You get the clump. So one-handed mace is really good because of that. Also, after the air compress compresses, the one-handed mace uses the E to stun that group. So it pulls and then stuns. Okay, and it's a longer stun than other things like Camlan. And Camlan's another one that we'll talk about with clump tanks, right? So clump tank, the Camlan is actually the largest AoE clump weapon in the game. Okay, Camlan, I believe it's 8, if not 9 meters, if I'm correct. Anyway, it's like one it's like 1 or maybe 2 meters bigger than the air compress from the one-handed mace. So Camland, I mean, technically Camland can also run air compress, right? But you're not going to run air compress with Camland. It just doesn't make sense. So with Camland, what you have is the ability to have mobility. With the W, you're able to use the snare charge, and the snare charge gives you mobility, but it also gives you a route. So if you think about the one-handed mace, the one-handed mace has a tall tail sign, but it's pretty quick. The Camland has a giant tall tail sign. I mean, like you see a Camland, like it's in this, like you can see it from a mile away, man. It's a huge freaking red blob, right? And it's also pretty slow, so you can prevent it very well. However, it's so big, and the Camland is more versatile than the one-handed mace. The one-handed mace uses the air compress, so it pulls people in with the W, and it stuns people with the E. It also does a little bit of slow, right? Now, the Camland pulls people in with the E, stuns with the E as well, and with the W, you have the snare charge that you can actually root. So the Camland's a little more versatile, and it's more mobile than the one-handed mace. However, the one-handed mace, you can use an offhand, and a lot of people like that because they like to wear shields. They like to wear tap roots if they're worried about surviving. Some people run one-handed mace with mist collar, and it's not bad because you get to reduce the cooldown time for your air compress, and that's pretty good. But people like to run one-handed mace with many different things. Usually, I see it with a shield. Okay, but those 3 are the main clump weapons. There is one more clump weapon, and that's the Morning Star. The Morning Star is the most OG clump weapon in the game, but it's just not very viable right now, man. And it makes me sad because I think it's a great weapon. I think I think it has great potential. It's just the way they made it now, it just doesn't work. The reason it doesn't is because it feels so clunky. Okay, using the E to dash and then using the E again to like root people, it just feels so clunky. It's really hard to use it properly and nicely in a ZvZ. It just doesn't feel good. Okay, but Morning Star is a good route. It's a good long route. And it keeps people rooted for a while, except for the fact that, you know, you have cleanses and all that. So usually having a long stun or a long route is not that big a deal, at least nowadays, right? So that's why Morning Star kind of takes the back seat. If I'm forgetting any clump tanks, let me know in the chat. But I think those are the main 4 that people use. I know that other people have tried using other things, like, I mean, technically all maces can air compress, right? But these are the ones that are mostly used or have been used at some point. The weapons, or sorry, the helmets that people use for clump tanks, they vary quite a bit. I sometimes see people run Judicator armor or Judicator helmet because it's the extra stun, right? So after you get the clump, then you use your Judicator helmet to try to like stun them a little bit longer, or just keep them clumped a little bit longer. I've seen people experiment with Hood of Tenacity, and like they get the clump and then they use Hood of Tenacity on it, which reduces their healing received. In my opinion, Hood of Tenacity is actually really, really strong. I think it's one of those that just is not being used enough. Okay, now I'm not saying that everybody out there should be running Hood of Tenacity, but I am saying that it has potential to have like maybe 1 or 2 clump tanks in your entire Zerg to run Hood of Tenacity, because they drop that on the enemy and suddenly they don't get heals very well. Okay, now it can get cleansed, but still, I mean, it's still pretty good. So that's another one that people could use. People like running Night Helmet because Night Helmet is just amazing, right? It gives you the ability to walk around for free without getting stopped by walls and stuff like that. It also reduces the CC that you're taking, the CC time that you're taking if they try to stun you or whatever. But Night Helmet is actually really important because if you're a Camland, Night Helmet is not as important. But if you're a one-handed mace or you're a Hand of Justice, you have to get deep into the enemy. And if the enemy basically drops anything on you to stop you, to stun you or whatever, then suddenly you won't be able to get the clump in time, or you won't be able to get the right clump, or you won't be able to get enough people in the clump. You won't be able to achieve your job, is what I'm saying. This is why Night Helmet is actually really important for clump tanks. I know that a lot of tanks nowadays are running a bunch of different things. There's no consensus right now. I know that I've seen some clump tanks running Hellion Hood, which personally I think Hellion Hood is amazing. Okay, but running with a clump tank, it doesn't really make sense too much. I understand they clump the people and then they drop a silence on them to try to silence them all and stuff. But I feel like it's more important to focus on your job. And we talked about that in episode 6, gearing up, right? That it's like you guys have to kind of focus on your job, right? And what the job of the clump tank is to get the clumps, to secure the clumps. Okay, so if your job is to secure the clumps, it's better if you have like a night helmet that's gonna allow you to secure those clumps. Okay, but I have seen them being run. I've seen a lot of clump tanks, and I do mean a lot, way more than I would like to admit, because I hate this. But a lot of clump tanks are running clerical. A lot in the entire game, man. It's terrible. It's absolutely atrocious because they're running clerical because they have to go into the enemy. Okay, they have to go into the enemy to get the clump because they're running a one-handed mace or one-handed justice. So they have to get inside the enemy. But then because they get inside the enemy, suddenly they're fucked. And why are they fucked? Well, because they're all the way inside the enemy and they're going to be clumped and killed themselves. Okay. So because of that, a lot of people are running clerical. They go in, they get a big clump and then they clerical and then they're like, yeah, I lived. And it's like, okay, well, that's great. But Night Helmet would have been good, or I mean, this is why I personally prefer Camland, but I understand with the meta right now being heavy melee, Camland doesn't make sense. So it's kind of a consequence of the meta, and I guess a Clerical makes sense. What I would prefer to see over a Clerical for these clump tanks, I would prefer to see more of the I forgot what it's called, man. It's the new leather helmet that doesn't let you die. Does anyone know what it's called? You guys can drop it in the chat. The new leather helmet that doesn't let you die, that keeps you from dying, keeps you from going below 1 HP. I prefer to see them doing that. Because remember, Clerical also reduces the healing you receive, right? If I'm not mistaken, you get like half. Something like that. Mistwalker helmet, is that what it is? Mistwalker hood? Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, that I'd like to see more clump tanks running that. Because if you're gonna be in danger zone, man, it's better that you're able to continue moving on the field, right? Clerical is just so bad because you stay immobile. And if your Zerg got pushed, then suddenly you're now behind the enemy Zerg. And you got to either catch up to your Zerg or you're going to die. Okay? Or you're just going to have to run out the other way, mount up, and then meet your Zerg like fucking tomorrow or some shit. You know, like... Clerical is just so bad. It's such a bad way to play. Mistwalker Hood gives you the option where if you really want to be safe, then okay, I guess. I still don't agree, but I guess I understand it, and it allows you to stay mobile. So that's a much better option in my opinion. I know that it's more expensive and all that, but it's better than Clerical. Let me catch up on the chat here real quick. Then it says, I wish more people liked wearing Night Helm, not gonna lie. I mean, honestly, dude, like we wouldn't get so many clumps and dumps all over the game, left and right, by Hodges and one-handed mace that are so predictable when they're gonna engage if people ran more Night Helm. But people don't. It's just not the thing right now. Let me see here. D-Tank Hellion God tier. Yeah, Hellion Hood for D-Tank is a totally different thing, that's it. Like, absolutely. Like, Hellion Hood... Hellion Hood is I'm just gonna say it is better than advertised. All right, that's all I'm gonna say. Hellion Hood is better than advertised. All right, but yeah, for disengaged tank it's amazing, but not for clump tank. I think it doesn't make sense for clump tank. Heavy mace for air compress for clump. Thoughts, Stellar Nova. Here's the thing. It's been tried before. Okay, it's been tried before. Where heavy mace uses the air compress. Here's the problem though. The air compress into a silence or silence and purge, right? Air compress into silence or purge is just not as useful as air compress into some form of stun or root. And the reason for it is because if you see how quickly people go and get air compressed and walk out of that air compress, yeah, like you're gonna notice how quick people just don't stay there. Okay, like if nothing forces them to stay. Now you can say, oh well, what if I have my buddy over here go and stun them while I do this? It's like, sure, but that requires coordination, and coordination is hard, right? It's hard to achieve. Constant, because again, we go for the consistency. We don't go for the onesie twosies, the nice highlight reels, right? We go for consistency. And heavy mace air compress, doesn't have consistency. I just don't think it does. Listen, if you think I'm wrong, go ahead and prove me wrong, and then show me videos, man, and I'll fucking shit. I'll praise you, man. But I just don't think it'll work very well. I've seen it used well. Dennis says I usually used well with new plate. Also, clerical on collars. Clerical on collars, I don't mind. I don't mind clerical on collars. I don't like running it myself, but I understand why people do. And depends on the fight. Sometimes I myself, if I'm gonna call, sometimes I run clerical. Most of the time I don't, but if I know that it's gonna be a really, really big fight, I tend to run clerical. I don't mind it as much for callers because callers tend to get full engaged by many people. Okay, now with the Mistwalker hood, you're still gonna be getting rooted, you're still gonna be getting stunned, you're still gonna getting whatever. So if the enemy wants to kill you, they can stun you literally until your Mistwalker hood ends. Whereas your clerical is actually a lot longer, so they and they makes you invulnerable, right? They can't stun you or stop you or anything like that. Yo, are we back? All right, yeah. Looks like we're back. All right, I have no idea what happened there. If if you got messed up or whatever, I'm sorry. On my end, it actually showed that everything was fine. On my end, it showed that everything was fine. So I have no idea. What went down. I'm sorry. I had to like shut down the entire thing. The beta Twitch trying to take you down. No. But I am using I am using a beta feature. So I don't use OBS. OBS is like what all the other streamers use. I use Twitch Studio Beta, right? The reason is because, to be honest, when I started like looking at streaming and stuff, OBS just looked really hard, man. Like, because I told you guys I don't know a lot, right? So, Twitch Studio Beta looked really simple, and also from what I read, Twitch Studio Beta is like gonna become the same thing eventually, right? Like, they're gonna be adding a ton of features over time, and it's actually from Twitch themselves. So if I happen to have like many major issues or things like that I have to like work with, I can work directly with Twitch as opposed to work with like whoever makes OBS and find out what they do and all that stuff. I don't know, man. I like to, I guess I'm a brand kind of person, so I stuck to the brands. All right. Anyway, where did I leave you guys off? I don't know. I was responding to some of you guys. I don't know what you guys heard or not, but did you guys hear when I responded to Stellar Nova's heavy mace with air compress? Yeah, anyway, yeah, you did? Okay. I also responded to you, Dennis. I don't know if you heard some of it, but basically clerical on callers, I think it's fine. It depends on the playstyle though. Some people. Yeah, it was after the clerical on callers. Okay, so then you guys caught most of everything. All right, anyway, let's keep it moving because we kind of got sidetracked there anyway. So this shutdown helped us out to get kind of back in line. So let's keep it moving here. So that was the helmets for clump tanks. The chest pieces for clump tanks. There are two primary ones that really, honestly, I don't think you should be using anything other than these two for clumping, for being a clump tank. And generally speaking, it's gonna be. Well, actually, I'm gonna add one more. Let's say Guardian Armor. Guardian Armor is good, okay, because it creates a slow. It does a slow. So if you go and get a clump and then you go and use the Guardian Armor, it's gonna slow the clump, right? So again, whatever you need to accomplish your job is to get that clump and keep that clump there. So Guardian Armor is gonna be perfectly fine for it. But things like Judicator Armor is also good because if you're gonna engage a clump that you just made, your entire Zerg is gonna run, especially nowadays when you have an entire melee DPS Zerg. Okay, what you're gonna have is everybody's gonna run into that clump and try to kill it. Okay, so if you drop a Judicator Armor on it, you're just ensuring that your guys, while they're hitting, that they're gonna be inside that Judicator Armor, and that's gonna help with the heals. That's gonna help with resistances. I know that a lot of people don't like Judicator Armor. Personally, I think it's the best armor in the game. When it comes to plate armors, I think it's the best armor in the game, but a lot of people don't like it. And the other one for clump tanks, that I will say there's potential here. A lot of people use it, actually. Personally, I don't think it's the best for this, but it works, and I see why it works. It's Demon Armor. Demon Armor is okay. I'm not going to say it's good for clumping tank, but it's okay. And the reason it's okay is because it allows you to walk back out, okay, without getting stunned, rooted, or slowed or whatever, right? Because you have that channel. It's uninterruptible and it allows you to keep on moving while you're using your Demon Armor. So after you get your clump, you can Demon Armor and walk back into your Zerg safely. You're not using the Demon Armor for literally anything else other than just helping ensure that you get back out. But I mean, that's what you can use the clumping for, right? So try to get back out. Since you're like a Hodge or a one-handed maze, you kind of put yourself in danger. Use the Demon Armor to get out. But the Demon Armor is also going to reduce your resistances. So I don't know. This is why I don't really like Demon Armor, man. I just don't. And a lot of people like it. I understand why, because right now a lot of people are melee DPS that they play weapons that can get reflected, and so reflecting them is very useful. And so a lot of clump tanks like running it because they'll go get the clump, and then when the enemy counter engages, they pop their Demon Armor onto the enemy counter engage because they're already standing there at the front. Okay, so it works with positioning. I understand the synergy with positioning. I just don't think the risk reward system is there, and it also tries to do something else other than ensuring that you're doing your job. Remember what I talked about before? I said you have to try to make your gear fit the job that you're doing, right? And if your job is to ensure clumps, Demon Armor, I don't know. It's a back and forth, man. Everybody argues differently. Dennis says, "Oh God is the best play heal, and it's so good." Are you talking about the Judicator armor with the heals? Camlan uses Demon well. Yeah, yes, you're right. I agree. Camlan uses Demon Armor well. I can agree with that. And the reason for it is because with Camlan, you're going to throw your E at a distance, right? And so you can stand back in Demon Armor while the enemy's counter engaging because you already did your job. Your job was to clump the enemy, whatever, and you did that with your E, so that's fine. And then when the enemy counter engages, you can kind of back up and use the edges of the cast of the Demon Armor to get people some resistances and also get some reflecting. So Demon Armor on Camlan, I don't mind. But Demon Armor on like Hand of Justice or One-Handed Mace, I kind of don't like it. Okay, but I had to throw it in there because people use it. So for boots, for clump tanks, for boots, I've seen people experiment with Judicator boots. Okay, the Judicator boots are the ones that they're like a little dash, and then when you get to a certain point on the dash, you're gonna like knock them up or something. Right? It's just like a second knockup. It's not bad. People tend to use it so like they get the clump and then they Judicator boots on the clump so that it keeps the clump clumped, right? It makes sense. It's part of your job. You're doing your job. It's assisting you at doing your job. Okay, like I don't mind it. The only problem with it is that you're kind of limiting your mobility. So if you're like a one-handed mace and you're trying to run Judicator boots, I don't know. I don't understand that because you don't have a lot of mobility. But if you're like a Hand of Justice and you're running the dash on the W, and then on top of it, your E itself is a mobility, right? It allows you to move in whatever direction you want. So you kind of have a lot more mobility with Hand of Justice. So I can see Judicator boots being pretty good with a Hand of Justice. You get the clump and then you Judy boot on it, and then you keep it clumped for as long as possible. I think that works. Most people are not using this though, but I wanted to throw it in because I think that it is a good one for clump tanks. Graveguard boots is another one that a lot of tanks are using, and that one's very simple. Even though it's slow and so the mobility is not great, immunity to stuns, roots, and slows are very, very important to ensuring that you get to the clump and make the clump, right? If you're a clump tank. So Graveguard boots just makes sense for clump tanks. It just does make sense. Similarly, Boots of Valor makes a lot of sense because Boots of Valor, when it procs, it gives you a speed boost and it also makes you immunity to stuns, roots, and slows. So Boots of Valor is very important for clump tanks because, again, you're going in with a one-handed mace or a Hodge. Not with Camlan. I'm talking about primarily Hodge and one-handed mace because that's what's being used right now. For those two, you're going to go in and then you're going to have to get out, right? And that's why I said, like, Demon Armor, sometimes people use it to try to get out. Well, I mean, you can use Boots of Valor, and if they try to stun you or whatever, then you proc it, and then suddenly you get to sprint completely out for free. Okay, so Boots of Valor is actually really good for clump tanks. It's also good for a couple other ones, but clump tanks, I see a big purpose for them there. Another one that I've seen people start to use more and more in clump tanks is the Mercenary Shoes. Mercenary Shoes are the ones that they have the break free ability, where basically you can dash no matter what, no matter if you're stunned, rooted, slowed, great arcaned, whatever, you just dash to where the fuck you want. Okay. Again, it helps you do your job, right? Because you get in and then you can get out. You can get out for free with the mercenary shoes. It makes sense. But again, you're limiting your mobility because you're not having a sprint, right? So not having a sprint is kind of a it kind of hurts if you're running a one-handed mace. You kind of need a sprint. But a Hodge, I don't mind seeing a Hodge with mercenary shoes. Hunter shoes is another one. Hunter shoes, a lot of people like running hunter shoes for the increased CC, okay, increased crowd control. But honestly, because they made the changes recently where crowd control kind of ticks down much faster than it used to, meaning that, like, how do I say this? The diminishing returns on CC became much worse. And because of that, adding more CC percentage to your individual CC is not that big a deal. Not like it was before. Don't get me wrong. Hunter shoes are still okay, but they're not great like they used to be because of that change. Now, I will say, if you're going to run leather shoes, the refreshing print is totally fine because remember, you always have to get the clump right before the rest of your Zerg engages. So you want to be a little faster than them. And being like a second or two faster, that's what the hunter shoes are going to give you. It's about a second or two faster, right? So if you run leather shoes, the leather shoes refreshing sprint. So if you're going to run refreshing sprint, I mean, it's going to help, right? So that again, it makes sense because of the synergy. Druid sandals, I've seen some people use Druid sandals, especially back in the day. Druid sandals are the ones that put ice on the floor and it slows people down. They're not terrible, but they're just not that good. I feel like there are much better options than that. But again, it makes sense, right? There's synergy because you're slowing the clump as you get the clump. You're going to slow it down to make sure they don't declump. Okay, so it makes sense. There's also mage sandals and clump tanks. Again, some people have used mage sandals. Morning stars especially used to use mage sandals all the time because they would go and blink while they're using the air compress. And so when they would actually blink, the air compress would click. And it would be like the most how do I say this? The most the hardest thing to anticipate. Let's just say that it was the hardest thing to anticipate is when a morning star would come in and blink. I've seen some Hodge people use it. They'll blink in with the mage sandals and then immediately use their E. It works. It catches people off guard a lot. One-handed mace, I've seen it being done with that as well. So it works. It's just again, you don't have as much mobility, right? So it depends on what you want to accomplish and how do you want to accomplish it. For clump tanks, the positioning, we kind of went through it earlier. It's going to be center front, right? You want to be in the front of your Zerg and you want to be in the center of the Zerg. You don't want to be in the flanks. You want to be in the center of the Zerg and you want to be in the front, but you don't want to be in the complete front. Because remember, I told you there's layers. The first person the enemy should see is the scout. And then they should see the kite tanks. And then they should see the disengaged tanks. And then they should see the clump tanks. And that's where you're going to be if you're a clump tank. So you need to be the last line of tanks before you start having some like DPS or supports. Okay, you should be up there. And you should be in the center. Why? Because most of the clumps are going to happen in the center. It's going to be really hard to get a really nice clump on the sides, on the flanks. Unless you're on tight chokes, then really the whole thing is the center. Now the tips for clump tanks, the tips for clump tanks, one of the biggest tips that I can say for clump tanks is don't telegraph. And I know that's easy, right? And these are the tips that I told you. These are things you can actually practice, okay? So don't telegraph your engage. Now, again, it seems so easy. It seems so obvious, but I'll tell you so many times, man, people forget to try to like camouflage their engages. Okay, or like disguise their engages, I should say, right? They just do it so, how do I say it? So easily, man. It's so stupid. Like, if you're a Hodge, every once in a while, just do this. Every once in a while, if you're a hand of justice player, every once in a while, just walk into the enemy. Just walk straight into the enemy and then walk back out. And do it a few times. Then the enemy's gonna be like, I don't know when you're walking into me and you're actually gonna use your E and when you're just walking into me and then walking out. It confuses them. Okay, so then they have to pop defenses every single time you walk in, just in case. Or what they'll most likely do is they're gonna be like, oh yeah, he's just walking in again, but he's not actually gonna do anything. And then they're not gonna pop anything, and that's when you actually hit them, right? So those things are very important. It's trying to like play with your enemy's emotions, right? Because you don't want them to understand when you're actually going to use your E. So you don't want to telegraph. That's the last thing you ever want to do as a clump tank. Now, the next one is plan out your clump. Okay, it's very easy for clump tanks to just be like, I'm going to wait for my caller to tell me when to engage. And then you wait, and then the caller says engage, and you're like, okay, I'm going to run in and then see what I can find. Don't do that. Don't do that. I want you guys to actually plan out your clumps. Like, I want you to look at the enemy and be like, ooh, right here, this group of people, they're clumping a lot. I can grab those guys. And then the caller doesn't call and engage, so then you're like, okay, now I got to look for a different one. Okay, those guys. I'm going to get those guys. Right? Or you start thinking about, oh, there's a couple healers that are overextended. I'm going to make sure I clump them in that clump. Right? Making sure you're clumping like high value targets is very important. Okay, if you can drag a Locust into it, if you can drag the Enigmatic into the clump, suddenly the Enigmatic can't drop his E, can he? Okay, so planning out your clump is actually a really important part of being a clump tank. And I'll tell you, 95% of all clump tanks don't plan out their clumps. They just go in and try to clump whatever they can. They think that more people in the clump is better, and that's it. That's not the way it is. It's try to get the people that are most valuable in that clump. That's way more important than just getting a ton of people in that clump. The last tip that I have for clump tanks is you want to engage early. Okay, so many clump tanks, especially like less, how do I say this? Below average clump tanks. Okay, below average clump tanks tend to wait until they say 3, 2, 1. Hit them now, hit them now. When they say hit them now, that's when the clump tank finally goes in. It's like, you're too late. Remember, you always have to be at least 1, if not 2 seconds earlier than your entire Zerg. Okay, so if the caller says 3, you should already be walking in. 2, you should already be looking at the clump you're about to clump. 1, you should already be casting your E. Like at 1, you should already be casting your E. I promise you, like if you start trying to engage and try to make sure you use your E at 1 every single time, you're gonna get better clumps, and they're gonna actually get hit by your DPS 10 times more. Okay, you're gonna be surprised how much of a difference that's gonna make for you as a clump tank. So now we're gonna move on to disengage tanks. And again, if you guys have any questions, drop them in the chat. I am watching. Hopefully the thing doesn't go down. All right. Let me know if it goes down on Discord. I know Dennis messaged me. I appreciate you. So disengage tanks. Okay. The weapons for disengage tanks are Grove Keeper, Heavy Mace, and Bedrock Mace. Okay. Grail Seeker can be considered disengage tank, but again, it's not really disengage, it's more kite. So I'm not going to talk about it too much. Mostly we're looking at disengage tanks. We're looking at Grove Keeper, we're looking at Heavy Mace, and we're looking at Bedrock Mace. Okay. All 3 of these do very important things, and they all do different things. Okay. Grove Keeper stuns, right? And in the W with the Grove Keeper, you have the ring, which slows. So you have a slow and a stun on Grove Keeper. On Heavy Mace, you have a snare charge, which is a root, and a silence purge with the E. Okay, so you have now, if you have a Grove Keeper and a Heavy Mace, now you have a slow, a stun, a silence purge, and a root. Okay, the other one that you have is Bedrock Mace, and Bedrock Mace also has the snare charge. Okay, but Bedrock Mace does a knockback. Okay, so right there you're hitting the trifecta. All 5 different types of CC in the game with having Grove Keeper, Heavy Mace, and Bedrock. A lot of people don't like running Bedrock because they say, oh, Bedrock is just for trolling. It's not for trolling, man. Bedrock is incredible. Bedrock is incredible. Obviously, you don't want somebody to Bedrock a clump, but it's like, if you have a person who's just trying to troll your Zerg, then sure, then just kick them out of the guild. It's that simple, right? But honestly, Bedrock is extremely useful. It's so underrated. Everybody thinks, again, it's a troll weapon. It's not. It's very powerful, especially for disengaging, but also for kiting. It's actually one of the few weapons that can actually become both disengage and kite. Grail Seeker is also both, but Grail Seeker doesn't do as well with disengage as it does with kite. It's significantly less important and less viable as disengage than kite. So the helmets for disengage tanks is going to be Judicator armor, or sorry, Judicator helmet. All right, Judicator helmet, because Judicator helmet adds to the stuns, and it also does an interrupt. Okay, so remember, what is your job as disengaged tanks? Well, with the Grove Keeper, you're trying to stop the enemy from engaging your Zerg, right? You're actually trying to stagger them, like make sure that they don't all engage at the same time, right? So when you stun people with the Grove Keeper, you're going into the enemy and stunning a bunch of people. That's a hard CC. And this is why Grail Seeker is not as useful, because Grail Seeker is not hard CC, it's soft CC. Roots are soft CC because they can still cast things while they're rooted, whereas stun, you can't cast anything while you're stunned. So Grove Keeper is a hard CC. It also interrupts, right? Because it's a hard CC. It interrupts anything that is happening. So if anybody's casting anything, you drop a Grove Keeper E on them and stun them, suddenly they are interrupted on their cast. Okay, so you did your job. If somebody's casting an E or something and you Grail Seeker them, it's not going to do anything. I mean, they can still continue casting. It's just going to slow their cast. That's all it is. It's going to slow their cast, but beyond that, it doesn't do anything else. So the Grove Keeper stops them. Okay, but then when the Grove Keeper E goes in and stops them, it also gives that Grove Keeper player a lot of resistances, and those resistances are very important to make sure that Grove Keeper gets out. Right, because they're going into the enemy while the enemy is engaging, so they're putting themselves in some danger. Okay, and they're able to get out because of those resistances. It's massive. It's like 200 resistance. It's massive. So Grove Keeper, very, very important for disengaged tanks. Heavy Mace also extremely important. Why? Because it's another hard CC. Why is Heavy Mace hard CC? Well, because the E not only silences, but it also purges. Okay, so if anybody has any sort of buffs on them at all to try to like hit harder or whatever, you just purged all of that, and then it silences. So it means that basically it's able to interrupt everything because of the silence. It interrupts everything. Okay, and it's hard to see because you can't do anything while you're silenced. You can't actually cast anything while you're silenced. Okay, so not only that, the snare charge, right, has the root, and I know they took out the interrupt factor from, or they said they took out the interrupt factor from snare charge, but it's really weird, man, because some things get interrupted and some things don't, and I still don't know exactly what gets interrupted and what doesn't. But even on the tooltip, it doesn't say it interrupts anymore like it used to. I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. Some things get interrupted, some things don't. I don't know what kind of fix they did on it. And then the bedrock is technically it's a hard CC because it actually knocks people back and it stops casting and all that. Okay, but it's a soft CC because you can actually do things after you already got knocked back. Okay, but while you're getting knocked back, and this is one thing that people don't know about knock-ups and knockbacks, right? Like the Soul Scythe and other things. A lot of people don't understand about knockbacks and knock-ups is that while you're in the air or while you're being knocked back, you can't actually cast anything. It's impossible to cast anything. Okay, so Bedrock Mace actually falls under the category of hard CC, even though it's very easy to counter with Night Helms, but nobody uses Night Helms nowadays, right? So Bedrock is extremely powerful right now. So all those things are the reasons for them. And remember, so we were talking about Judicator Helmet, and Judicator Helmet helps with that because remember, for clump tanks, Judicator Helmet helps keep everybody clumped. But Judicator Helmet helps with interrupting a large amount of people from casting. It also stops them from moving. Okay, it stops motion. And that's enough interrupt. Again, just because you force somebody to stop moving their character, now they have to add one more click where they have to click again to keep running. Okay, the character doesn't just stop and then keep running in the direction they were running. They stop and that's it until the person actually clicks something else. So you're creating more and more things for the enemy to do with Judicator Helmet. Night Helmet is also going to be pretty useful for disengaged tanks, but not as useful. Night Helmet is useful because it's going to help you get to where you need to be. And so often it's going to be useful to get you out. Okay, because you're going in like a Grove Keeper, a Heavy Mace. Those are melee technically. And so you're going to go in, you're going to stop the enemy, do whatever you want. And then what they're going to do is they're going to try to kill you because you just stopped everything and they're going to be annoyed. And so they're going to try to kill you and you have to try to get out. So having Night Helmet is going to help a lot to try to get out. The next one is going to be Hellion Hood. Hellion Hood is massive. Like we were talking about it in the chat earlier. Hellion Hood is massive, man. More and more people are picking it up and it's because they see how good it is. Okay, but I'm telling you, man, it's been great for a very long time. Okay, Hellion Hood is like a staple right now for disengaged tanks. You just stop almost everything that you pop that Hellion Hood on. It's just great. It's just great. The chest for disengaged tanks, night armor is good because again you're causing you're disengaging, right? Because if the enemy's coming in and you already used your E, you already used your W, you already used your Q, and you have now a wind wall, you can also try to wind wall the enemy away as they're trying to come in. And again, I said this many times, people don't use night helms, right? So if they don't use night helms, then night armor and bedrock mace, they're both gonna stop the enemy 100%. I can't tell you how many times people literally cannot cross an entire choke just because they don't have night helms. It's crazy. It's crazy. So night armor, very, very useful for disengaged tanks. Another one for disengaged tanks is very useful is guardian armor. Guardian armor is very good because it reduces the damage of the enemies. Okay, and it also slows them, so it staggers them because you're slowing a group of the enemy DPS, and the other group is not being slowed, so they're gonna hit like a second before the ones you slowed, right? But on top of that, when the other guys hit, you're gonna actually be able to reduce their damage. I think it's 50%, so it's great. The guardian armor is great, and usually it's used with Grove Keeper because Grove Keeper goes in, gets resistances, and then pops his guardian armor and basically stops everything. That's the really, really OG meta for disengaged tanks, is Grove Keeper with guardian armor. People don't really use it as much anymore because, well, people just don't use Grove Keeper in general. But it could also work with heavy mace. So if you're a heavy mace player and you're kind of looking for a little bit more of a budget build, rather than run like Judicator armor or Duskweaver, then yeah, guardian armor is very, very solid. And that leads me to the next one, right? So Duskweaver armor is incredible. The only thing is that Duskweaver armor can't be used by a lot of people because it cancels each other out. And personally, I wouldn't use Duskweaver armor on disengaged tanks. I would use them more on kite tanks. But if your Zerg doesn't have a lot of kite tanks, then sure, put it on disengaged tanks. It works really well. It works great. I mean, with a Grove Keeper, you go Grove Keeper in, drop a Duskweaver armor while they're all trying to run and sprint in, and now you staggered the enemy. You did your job. That's it. You did your job. The next one is Judicator armor. Judicator armor is great for disengaged tanks because very often as disengaged tank, you're going to put yourself out of position because you're going to have to go into the enemy. Again, you got to go into the enemy to stop the enemy from doing whatever they're doing. So I wouldn't use it with Bedrock because Bedrock has a nice range, but I use it with Heavy Mace all the time. I use Judicator armor with Heavy Mace. Grove Keeper could also use Judicator armor because they're also going in. But remember, Grove Keeper already has the resistances, so adding more resistances to your resistances from your E doesn't really make sense. But yeah, I use Judicator armor with Heavy Mace because I need a defensive myself, and I don't have any defenses with Heavy Mace. I do want to say the Hellion Hood. I kind of brushed over it, but the truth is that Hellion Hood is very strong because it's an offensive and defensive hood. Okay, it's an offensive and defensive thing. The Hellion Hood, I can't tell you how many times I go into the enemy and I stop them, I silence them, whatever I do, purge them, and then they want to kill me, and they're trying to kill me, and guess what? My Zerg pulled away or something. I don't know. I'm now like kind of deep in the enemy back line, and they're focusing me, and I'm gonna die. I can't tell you how many times I'll just drop Hellion Hood on top of myself, right? And then I just stay in the smoke cloud for a second, and I go invis, right? Because it also makes you invis. Okay, so because it makes me invis, I just stay in the smoke cloud for about a second, and then I come out in whatever direction the enemy is not looking, and then they just forget about me, right? If it's a smaller scale ZvZ, they're not gonna forget about you. You're gonna die. But if it's a large scale ZvZ, 9 times out of 10, they're gonna forget about you. The moment you go invis, they're gonna forget about you. So Hellion Hood has saved my life so many times. And on top of it too, I mean, like I said, you use it defensively, you actually pop it on the enemy. It's massive. The last armor for disengaged tanks, but it's not very good, honestly. It's Armor of Valor. It's so hit or miss. I mean, if you're a Bedrock Mace, I can see you using Armor of Valor, and the reason for it is because your Bedrock Mace, you can hit it from a distance. And after you do that, you don't really have to do much more. Right? I mean, you can snare charge, do whatever you want. But essentially, the Armor of Valor, you want to stand in the damage so that when you stand in the damage, you silence everybody. Now, one of the things is I don't understand why Armor of Valor is not being used more. With the meta that we have, Armor of Valor should be being used more. Again, I don't really like Armor of Valor, but it makes sense to fight against this current meta. And the reason for it is because Demon Fangs have 3 E's, don't they? So if they hit you with the first E and you're using Armor of Valor, they're going to be silenced. So now suddenly they can't cast their second or third E. Right? It just makes sense. It just makes sense. I just don't understand why people don't use it. I know it's not great, but it makes sense right now. That's all I'm saying. It makes sense right now. The boots for Disengage Tank are the Graveguard boots. We already talked about that earlier with the Clump Tanks, but Graveguard boots essentially allow you to come in and out of the enemy. Because again, with Disengage Tanks, you're going into the enemy, similar to Clump Tanks. You're going into the enemy, so you need to get out. Graveguard boots help with that. Boots of Valor, same thing. Guardian boots. I use the Guardian boots on Disengage Tank as a heavy mace. It's amazing. It's incredibly amazing. I basically have 2 gigs because I run gig instead of resistance spots. And that's a whole different thing that I can talk about later. But essentially, Gigantify gives you more survivability than resistance, but it screws up your healing. Okay, so I'm just going to put it there. I know the debate is out there, but I'm not going to debate it right now. So the Guardian boots actually give you basically a second gig. And that's what I do. I basically have a second gig. And it makes it really hard for people to kill me because I have 2 gigs. Then for boots, you can have the mercenary boots. Again, the mercenary boots are the ones that let you blink away. Again, it helps because you're inside the enemy. You want to blink away. And then the druid sandals, because some people like running it. Very few people nowadays. Very few people. But again, it's the ice. It slows people. So if you're slowing people, you're kind of helping to stagger them. So it makes sense. It's just not great. Positioning of Disengaged Tanks. You're gonna be at the front, just like the Clump Tanks, but you're not gonna be in the middle. You're gonna be at the flanks. Okay, you're gonna be in the flanks as a Disengaged Tank always. Always as a Disengaged Tank, you should be in the flanks. You should never see ever a Disengaged Tank in the middle of the front of the Zerg. And the reason for it is because where the enemy is most likely to engage is gonna be that middle. And if they engage the middle and they catch the Disengaged Tank in the clump, then suddenly the Disengaged Tank can't go and stop the enemy engage, can they? Because they're being fucking stunned, right? So you need to have the Disengaged Tanks at all times in the flanks. If you're a Disengaged Tank and you're playing in the middle, you're fucking up. The tips, and I know I'm going kind of fast because we kind of spent too much time in the beginning. But if you guys have questions or anything, just drop them in the chat. So the tips for Disengaged Tanks, you got to predict enemy engages, okay? It's not like, as a Disengaged Tank, you can't depend on the caller to tell you when the enemy is engaging. If you wait till the caller tells you when the enemy is engaging, you're already too late as a Disengaged Tank. As a Disengaged Tank, you have to read the enemy yourself. It's not the caller's job. It's your job as a Disengaged Tank to ensure that you know when the enemy is coming in and to stop them before they actually full-blown come in. If you are able to predict enemy engages as a Disengaged Tank, you're probably one of the top 20% of Disengaged Tanks in the game. If you don't know how to predict enemy engages, then you need to spend more time reading the enemy and less time just walking around the field and waiting for your caller to tell you how to press buttons. Okay? So, another thing is disengage early. Don't wait until the enemy is literally about to hit the clump and be like, yeah, I'm going to stop them right in the nick of time. Don't do that. Don't do that. As a Disengaged Tank, what you want to do is you want to stop them as early as possible. That way, the other Disengaged Tanks who are a little bit slower can stop them later. Okay? But if you're going to go and wait till the enemy's about to hit, you're making a big mistake because you're taking a huge risk. You're hoping that you can stop everything yourself when a lot of times you can't. Okay? Remember, your skills only hit 10 people. And if the enemy has 30 DPS, like in a very large ZvZ, they have 30 DPS engaging, you're not going to stop all 30. You can only stop 10. So the last tip that I can tell you for Disengaged Tanks is don't overstay. I know this is kind of self-explanatory, right? Don't overstay, don't overextend, that kind of stuff. But the truth is listen, get in, use your E, use your W, use your boots or your armor if you want to use them, or if you can, or if it works, it makes sense. And then get the fuck out. Don't stay there and be like, I'm gonna auto attack this guy. Don't stay there and be like, I'm gonna drop a Q on this guy because yeah, I have a good pierce on my Q, from the Growth Keeper Q, and I'm gonna pierce him. It's like, no, don't stay. Get the fuck out. Don't become a casualty after you just served your entire Zerg. Because remember, if you save your entire Zerg, that means that the enemy is real fucking pissed off at you because you stop them. You stop them from doing what they wanted to do. So they're gonna, you become target number 1 as disengaged tank. So once you stop whatever you need to stop, don't do more. Get the fuck out. And when I say get the fuck out, don't just walk straight back to your Zerg. Walk to the flanks. Remember, you always need to be on the flanks. All right. The next part is going to be the kite tanks, okay? And this is the difference, right? Kite tanks and disengaged tanks. Remember, disengaged tanks go in when the enemy is engaging. Kite tanks, I mean, they can, but that's not really their job. Kite tanks try to make sure to disrupt the enemy from doing whatever they want to do whenever they want to do it. That includes a lot of things off the time that the enemy is engaging. So if you're a kite tank, if you're kiting, it's very easy, right? You want to make sure you stagger the enemy. You're stopping the enemy as much as possible. If you're a Grail Seeker, you're out there, you're throwing your E on them to make sure you stagger them, and the enemy has to use cleanses and all that shit to get to you. Bedrock Maze, same thing. You're turning around, you're throwing your Bedrock E, and then you're running back out, right? Grove Keeper, you throw rings, right? Because Grove Keeper can also be for kiting. Grove Keeper, you throw a ring, and then you keep on walking. Okay, don't overstay, because then you're gonna get caught yourself. And then another one that is never being used. Well, it was the Ironclad. Now I think they changed it, right? So not relevant anymore. But Ironclad was a good kite tank weapon. The Grail Seeker and the Bedrock and the Grove Keeper. Those are the 3 main kite weapons, as well as Icicle. Okay, now Icicle, I don't include it as a tank, because remember, today's episode is tank. Icicle is a support. Okay, it's a kite support, but it's not a tank, because you don't have the HP and the survivability of a tank. Okay, so don't get the two mistaken. Don't say, oh yeah, I'm an Icicle tank. No, you're not an Icicle tank. It's great that you're an Icicle, because it's going to be very useful, but you're not a tank. Don't lie to yourself, because that's how you people get killed. The kite tanks are Grail Seeker, Bedrock, and Grove Keeper. That's it. Okay, now when you're not kiting, this is the question, right? Is, well, what do you do with kite tanks that are when your Zerg's not kiting? Let's say you're just holding. Okay, so what you're supposed to do is, if it's an open field, you want to be inside the enemy. And when I say inside the enemy, I don't mean like all the way in their fucking back line. I'm just saying inside a few of their tanks, right? Remember, again, the line says scout first, and then it's gonna be the kite tanks, and then it's gonna be the disengaged tanks, and then it's gonna be the clump tanks, right? So when I tell you that you need to be a little bit inside the enemy, I mean that as a kite tank, you should be in between the disengaged tank and the clump tanks for the enemy. Okay, why do you want to be right in front of the enemy clump tanks? The reason is simple, because if you're a Grail Seeker, you see that Hand of Justice or that one-handed mace go in. What you need to do is you need to stop the enemy, stagger the enemy, but you don't want to stop that clumper. You don't care about the clumper. You want to stop everybody behind him. So if you're parallel, if you're right next to that enemy clump tank, and you see the enemy clump tank run past you instantly, then you know for a fact that the rest of his Zerg is about to engage as well, and they're going to follow up behind him. So what you do is you throw your E across the enemy front line to stop the enemy from coming in. And what you're going to do is you're going to stagger them, because some will get through and some won't. And so they're going to drop their damage at a staggered rate. This is a very different thing than a disengaged tank, because a disengaged tank, like I said, you want to disengage early, but not that fucking early. Okay? You want to disengage the enemy when they're a little closer to hitting your Zerg. Okay? Because if you stop them that far back, as a disengaged tank, you did not interrupt anything, because their casts are still available. Right? Their sprint, they still have time for their sprint. Okay? So none of those things are going to be as important. Okay? The disengaged tank is the last line of defense before your Zerg actually gets hit. Okay? Because the clump tanks are not supposed to do anything about it. It's supposed to be the disengaged tanks. And so the kite tanks are supposed to buy time for the disengaged tanks to act and to do their job. Okay? So that's why the kite tanks are supposed to be up there. Now, when you say, oh, well, how can I do that if the enemy's gonna, like, you know, they're gonna target me and they're gonna kill me? Okay, well, that's why you have survivability, right? The kite tanks, you're gonna have, again, Grove Keeper can work for both, but Grove Keeper is more for disengaged than kite, but it can work for both, because if you're up there with a Grove Keeper and they decide to target you, you can just drop your E on top of them and gain resistances, and that's your survivability. Okay, now Bedrock, you're actually doing it at a distance, so you can continue to do things at a distance and you're staying safe. The fact that you're doing things at a distance is your survivability. Grail Seeker, your survivability comes from your mobility. You're using the cartwheel. The cartwheel gives you resistances, but it also gives you movement speed. Okay, those things are extremely important. And so Grail Seeker, Bedrock, and Grove Keeper are all three good options for Kite, but Grail Seeker and Bedrock are the two best ones. Okay, so now the helmets that you're going to use for the Kite tanks, you want to run Knight Helmet. Okay, you really do. But there are others, and I understand why you would use others, but Knight Helmet is very important. Why? Because you're gonna be the first line of defense. I mean, the Scout is not a line of defense. It's just the guy that sees everything happening, right? But they're not gonna do anything. They're mounted, running around, looking at the enemy. So as Kite tanks, you're gonna very often try to get caught. Like the enemy's gonna try to catch you, right, and try to kill you. So having a Knight Helm is very important as a Kite tank because you need to be able to get out of the enemy if the enemy decides to kill you, okay, or stop you or stun you or whatever. Okay, Judicator Helmet is also used for Kite tanks sometimes. It makes sense because again, if you're that deep in the enemy and your goal is to try to disrupt them and to try to slow them from hitting the clump, the Judy AoE is actually pretty big, and so it helps accomplish that mission. But again, I think Knight Helm is just more important because you being able to survive is more important than staggering that enemy a little bit more. I know some people use Assassin Hood a lot with Kite tanks, especially Grail Seeker, because Grail Seeker has a 40-second cooldown. I understand it, but here's the problem with Assassin Hood. It makes you channel, okay? And if you're going to channel something, yeah, you can channel it inside the enemy, sure. But the enemy is probably going to disrupt you. If they don't disrupt you in your channel, then they're probably not even that good an enemy, so it doesn't matter, right? But if they are a good enemy, they're probably going to disrupt you, channeling your Assassin Hood, and now your cooldowns are all fucked up. And not only that, you stayed there channeling, so now the Zergs are all moving, doing other things. Okay, like they're getting in positions, they're doing all kinds of things while you're just standing there channeling. Assassin Hood is just so bad because it limits mobility. That's the problem with Assassin Hood is the fact that it limits mobility. I understand, people think it's great. I understand the use of it with Grail Seeker. I don't understand it with literally anything else. For the chest pieces with Kite tanks, we have the Dustweaver armor, which, in my opinion, right now, the Dustweaver armor is OP. Literally overpowered as fuck. Okay? You guys should be using it in every single Zerg. I would say one Dustweaver armor per party. To be honest, like, it's just incredible. And the only reason it's not more than that is simply because they cancel each other out. Okay? But realistically speaking, it's one of the best armors in the game right now. Dustweaver armor is great. You should always run it with a Kite tank. Always. Knight armor is also really good because again, you're trying to kite, you're trying to buy space, you're trying to push the enemy away. Okay, the disengaged tanks just did their job, they stopped everything, but the enemy's still trying to like full push you. It's your job as a Kite tank to, well, fucking help your Zerg kite, right? If the enemy's trying to full push you, even though the disengaged tanks did their job and stopped them, the enemy's still trying to full send it. It's your job to allow your Zerg to kite. So having a Knight armor is very important. Usually also, after the enemy engages, the Knight helmets usually wear out, right? They only last like 5 seconds. So having a Knight armor being used right after the full engage and the enemy's still trying to full push you, Knight armor is extremely viable in those scenarios. The last one that some people use for Kite tanks, although I personally don't like it, is Guardian armor. Guardian armor is used sometimes by people, but it just doesn't make as much sense because you're so deep into the enemy that if they want to kill you, they're going to kill you anyway. And so it gives you a little bit of survivability, but not that much. The slow is good. It helps stagger the enemy. But again, you're the first line of defense. They're not usually clumping. How far into you are the enemy, they're not usually clumping. They usually clump much closer to your Zerg when they're about to hit. And that's why the disengaged tanks do their job, right? Because the enemy is already clumping to hit the clump. But you as the first line of defense as a Kite tank, Guardian armor is not as useful. It's not as viable. It can be good in certain situations, but it's just not, again, it's not consistently good. Zilky says, also purges your allies. What purges your allies? Guardian armor? Guardian armor doesn't purge. I don't know, man. I don't know. You gotta explain it. Oh, the Dustweaver armor. What? No, it purges the boots of your allies. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Bro. Listen. I don't like to tell people like, oh no, you don't know, like you're wrong. Because a lot of times, man, people like know things that nobody else knows, right? And then it's like, oh fuck. So if it's something that you know for a fact, then I'm hella surprised and I'm gonna test it out. But from what I know, it doesn't purge allies, man. From what I know. I might be wrong though. I've been wrong before. So anyway, let's move on. The boots for kite tanks. Boots of Valor is great. Great for kite tanks, man. It's so incredible. If you're a kite tank and you're wondering what kind of boots you should wear, Boots of Valor, 100% of the time. Because Boots of Valor gives you a lot of survivability. Because the speed boost is insane, and it gets procced and cleanses whenever you get stunned, rooted, or slowed. So if the enemy does want to kill you, Boots of Valor that shit, and then you're gone. Right? It's amazing. Boots of Valor is so good. Graveguard boots, similarly, they're good because of that as well. But Graveguard boots are just not as good as Boots of Valor, because Boots of Valor, if you're getting targeted, again, you're gonna get stunned, rooted, or slowed. So you want that faster sprint than Graveguard. Graveguard boots, yeah, you're gonna run away, but pretty slow. They can keep up with you. They can probably still kill you. Mercenary shoes, again, you have that blink. I don't really like it for kite tanks too much, but I know some people use them. Mage sandals, same thing. Some kite tanks like mage sandals because they get to go into the enemy, do whatever the fuck they want, and then just blink out. It works better than mercenary, I think, in certain instances. But I don't know. I'm not a fan of those. I prefer Boots of Valor or Graveguard, but definitely Boots of Valor more than that. The positioning on the kite tanks, I already talked about it a lot, right? You're gonna be at the very front, and by being at the very front, I mean a little bit into the enemy Zerg. Okay, if you're not like standing between like the enemy first few tanks and like the backline, then you're not far into the enemy enough. Now, at the same time, with that being said, you don't want to get too far away from your own Zerg, right? With kite tanks, you don't want to get too far away from your own Zerg, because what's the purpose of helping your Zerg kite if your Zerg is like not even reachable by the enemy? Okay, you only have to help your Zerg kite 2 screens at most, and that's literally at most. If the front line of your Zerg is 2 screens away from the enemy's front line, you do not need a kite. Like, that is so much. What you really want to do is keep the enemy at a 1 screen distance at all times. That's what you want to do. 1 screen distance from your Zerg. That's what you want to do at all times. If it's a stable fight where you're both just standing, like both Zergs are just standing looking at each other, and they're kind of just engaging on each other, whatever, you want to be a little bit into the enemy Zerg so that way you can stop their back line. Right? You don't want to stop their front line. You don't give a fuck about the front line. You give a fuck about their back lines. You want to stop their back line. But it's very important that if your Zerg starts to pull back, you pull back with them. Don't stay inside the enemy Zerg while your entire Zerg is walking away, because the enemy Zerg will turn on you and kill you. Because kite tanks are very high value targets. So high value targets die first all the time. On the tip section for kite tanks, go like just play front to back. Right? Play front to back, but when I say front to back, I don't mean literally the first guy in front of you. I mean try to stop the guys that are up in the very front, when the ones that are like DPS. Okay? You don't need to stop the clump from happening. Okay? Let the clump tanks pass by. That's okay. Let the clump happen. It's not a big deal. Okay? What you should do, because again, the supports are going to take care of that, the healers are going to take care of that, the cleanses are going to take care of that. Don't worry about that. Your job is to make sure that you stagger the enemy DPS. That's the job of the kite tanks. Also, one of the big mistakes that I see kite tanks do, and this honestly leads to kite tanks dying so often when they don't understand how to do this properly. What happens with kite tanks is that you go inside the enemy, you're doing everything, and then you want to do everything to stop the enemy right now. You think that you need to use literally every single thing right now to stop the enemy. It's like, no, man. You guys got to stop just blowing everything in one hit. What you need to do is you need to cycle your cooldowns, because you have multiple ways to stop the enemy, right? Like, let's say you're a Grail Seeker, and you have a Judicator helmet, okay, and you have a Duskweaver armor, okay. So you're a Grail Seeker. You're gonna go, okay. Use your E, okay. Use one E. If you notice that a lot of them got rooted, don't use the other one. Just save it. Okay? Because you got enough people rooted. That's okay. And now after that group of people that got rooted starts to walk again, then drop your Judicator helmet. Right? Literally just wait. Just be patient. Just wait until they actually start walking again, and then use your Judicator helmet. And then, right, if you see them like popping sprints because you keep stopping them, right? Because usually you want to stop them before they actually pop sprints. But let's say they already popped sprints or whatever. Then use your Dustweaver armor. Okay? Or do it the opposite. Use the Dustweaver armor first, then the Judy helmet, then the Guile Seeker, whatever. You get my point, right? It's all situational. I'm not telling you to follow all of this step by step. I'm telling you, don't use everything at once. Don't be like Guile Seeker, Judicator helmet, Dustweaver armor, right? Don't just throw everything out there, because you're only going to stop very few amounts of people compared to the amount of people you can stop. And then also sometimes you can stop a few people with just one Guile Seeker E, and then sometimes that was enough to like just save your entire Zerg. So then why waste your other cooldowns? Why force yourself to stay under cooldown on everything else? Why not just be like, okay, that was enough. I'm gonna chill now. I'm gonna relax now. I'm gonna wait for the next movement, right? Cycle your cooldowns. It's very important. I mean, honestly, for all roles, cycling cooldowns is extremely important. But for this role specifically, it's even more important, because if you use everything at once, yeah, you're gonna stop a small group, but you're not gonna be as effective. And then the last thing is for kite tanks is stagger the enemy. Again, I've said this many times, stagger the enemy. Don't stop the enemy. Don't actually go and try to stop the enemy and be like, I'm going to stop everything, right? This is what I'm talking about, cycling cooldowns, right? Because people have the mentality that they have to stop the enemy at all costs. And it's like, no, you don't. You just need to stagger them. You just need to slow them. You just need to make it harder for them to get to where they want to be. Okay? If they're walking west, and you know your Zerg is not going to engage anytime soon, and the enemy's walking west for whatever reason, you have no idea why they're walking west. Or maybe you do, I don't know. But why not just throw one Guile Seeker E on them? Just make it hard for them to walk around. At the minimum, what you're going to do is you're going to pop 4 Starting Caves, right? At the most, you're going to buy your Zerg time that might actually help your Zerg with positioning. I don't know. But the truth is the more disruptive you become to the enemy, the more annoying you get, where the enemy can't even just walk, the more frustrated they're going to get, and the more frustrated they get, the more mistakes they start making. Okay, so that's your goal as a kite tank. All right, so now we're going to move on to the last section of tanks, and that's the scout tanks. Okay, and I say scout tanks because realistically speaking, you shouldn't be anything other than a tank if you're scouting. I mean, an icicle, I guess, would be okay because it has high mobility, even though that's not a tank. But yeah, you don't really want something that is not survivable, because again, you're gonna get killed. That's a scout tank. So the weapons for scout tanks, we already talked about some of them, right? Guile Seeker, it makes sense. Why? Well, actually, let me explain it first. So Guile Seeker, Bedrock, Heavy Mace, and Grove Keeper are all good for scout tanks, and the reason for it is because all 4 of those have survivability. Okay, we already talked about the Grove Keeper with the resistances. The Heavy Mace has survivability because it has mobility with the W, but it also has a hard CC. Okay, the Bedrock Mace has a distance engagement, right? It also has mobility with the W, and the Guile Seeker has a great mobility. Okay, but one thing that these all have in common as well is that they have large area of effect CC. Okay, this is very, very important if you're a scout, because if you're a scout, you notice a flank first, you're gonna be the first to respond to stopping that flank. And very often when a flank comes in, they're gonna come in clumped, right? It happens all the time. The flanks usually don't take time to spread out. Why? Because flanks have to be fast, and they notice that they already got scouted. They're not gonna give a fuck about spreading out. They're gonna just try to go in quick, right? So scout tanks need to be able to stop an entire front on their own. Guile Seeker can do that. Bedrock can do that. Heavy Mace can do that. Grove Keeper can do that. Okay, so those things are very, very important because they need to be able to stop an entire front on their own. Okay, because very often scout tanks will have to do that themselves. Helmets that they use, Judicator is extremely, extremely good. Hellion Hood is extremely good. Night Helm is okay for scouts, but not necessary. But Hellion Hood and Judicator helmet, it should be one of those two. If you're usually a scout tank, you should be running Judicator or Hellion Hood. There's no other helmet that you should be running other than those two. And I know that people are like, oh no, why I run, because I run Guile Seeker, I run assassin hood, it's like, no. Because your job is not to go and stop a lot of engages as a scout. As a scout, you're going to spend most of the fight mounted, especially if it's a big fight. And I'm talking about big fights, right? I'm not talking about little fights. I'm talking about big fights. So in big fights, you're going to spend most of the fight mounted. That's the truth. And so because you're mounted most of the time, it doesn't matter how many times you use your E, because you're going to stop a clump or whatever. You're going to stop a flank, and then you're going to mount up and go check some other shit. Okay, because now the rest of your disengaged tanks have the flanks covered. You bought your Zerg some time. You did your job. Now go back to doing your other job, which is scouting. Okay, so it's very important that you're able to stop as much as possible. This is why Hellion Hood and Judicator Helmet are both extremely important for scout tanks. At the same time, though, you want to have some form of survivability, right? Which you already have some, but you want more. This is why Judicator armor is good, but also Knight armor is great because, again, you want to try to stop the enemy from engaging the flanks and stuff like that. But if you want to go for survivability, Judicator armor is great. And again, Duskweaver armor is also great. Okay, it's also great. It's amazing for scout tanks as well. But if I had to choose for a scout tank, I'd go Judicator or Knight over Dusk. Reason being that a lot of times, again, like I said earlier in the beginning of the episode, I said scout tanks tend to get targeted. They like the enemy tends to full engage on scouts, right? And so because of that, if you're getting full engaged on, you want to have some form of survivability like a Judicator or at least a Knight, because then you can like run through a choke and then Knight armor the choke, and then it'll buy you maybe an extra second of time. I don't know. But yeah, so those things would work better than like the Duskweaver armor. For the boots for scout tanks, you want Boots of Valor. Okay, again, Boots of Valor are extremely important. Or you can run any sprint, literally any other sprint. Okay, just any sprint is totally fine. When I go running around scouting, I use Guardian Boots, but I don't use the Guardian Boots when I'm scouting. I flip the skill to the fucking, I don't know what the sprint is, the healing sprint thing from plate boots. Okay, so I switch it to that, and the reason is simple, is because I need to have a sprint. You need a sprint. Okay, Boots of Valor is fine, but you need any other sprint. Okay, you can't go and be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be a scout tank and then I'm gonna run Graveguard Boots. No, you're gonna die. If they dismount you, you're gonna die 100%. Okay, so you need something fast that gets you away from the enemy. Positioning. So the positioning for scout tanks, obviously, it's not gonna be within your Zerg. It's gonna be somewhere around your Zerg, right? Usually you want to be on the flanks of the enemy or in the flanks of your own Zerg, scouting at least one screen away from your Zerg. You don't want to be scouting literally like within one screen of your Zerg. You want to be scouting within 1 or 2 screens from your Zerg. Okay, when you're scouting, you want to run an armored horse. Okay, T7 is great because it has the same speed as a Swiftclaw, but it has a great survivability. But if T7 armored horse is too expensive for you, T6 armored force is just fine. Okay, just know that you got to be a little more careful with scouting when you're running with a 115% speed boost mount, but you're gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay for the most part. Okay, unless you do something stupid, and that's on you. Okay, but armored horse is like an absolute necessity for scout tanks. Absolute necessity, and so few scout tanks actually run armored horses. I don't understand it why. You also have the what's it called, man? The giant horse. The giant horse. I've seen some people run the giant horse. I know it's a little pricey as well. I mean, it's up to you. But giant horse is also a really good option for that. Then it says it's also really cheap for the stats you get. Which one? The armored horse? The T6 armored horse? If you're saying that, then yeah, absolutely. Like the amount of armor, also CC resistance that you get from armored horses is great. It's absolutely great. All right, so the tips for scout tanks. One of the biggest things I can teach anybody about scouting as a scout tank is that you need to literally stare at the mini-map, look at the blobs. Okay, like literally non-stop, you need to have your eyes on that mini-map. Okay, the reason is because every once in a while, the blob will shift, right? And I'm going to teach you guys something real quick, okay? The blob is centered around center mass. So if you haven't taken mathematics or whatever, and you don't understand what I'm talking about. So if you have, you know what? I might, no, I'm not going to do it because then it's going to take forever. So if you have a group of people, let's say there's 5 people on like the left side, let's just say the left side, and then there's 1 person on the right side. The total amount of people in that blob is 6, right? But the blob is going to be shifted towards the left side because there's more people on the left than the right. Okay, now use that same mentality for literally hundreds of people in the zone and for all the blobs in the Zergs and ZvZs. Okay, so the blobs will shift based on the weight of the players that are standing in the blob. So how do you use this to your advantage if you're a scout? If the blob is if the center of the blob is literally the center of your fight between you and another enemy, okay, then that means that there's probably no one out trying to flank you. But if suddenly the blob kind of shifts a little bit to the southeast, just a little bit, and you'll literally see just a tiny little fucking change. And this is what I'm saying. You have to stare at the fucking minimap because you'll see a tiny little change. And you see the blob just little bit move to the southeast. You should mount the fuck up and run east and go check out and see, just to confirm if that was just people running around and all that, or if a flank is coming, okay? Now, other times, what will happen is there will be an entire new blob, like a little T1 blob that comes out from the north side or something, right? Then that's a very obvious one. Everybody understands that. But understanding how these blobs move and how they kind of, shift left and right is very important to understanding where you should be scouting. Because so many people are just like, yeah, I'm scouting, but you're scouting places that like there's no reason to scout, okay? You need to scout efficiently. You need to scout places and times, right, that are actually going to produce results, not just waste your time running around on a mount, because that's also boring. On the other side, for scouting, another tip is you should ride back and forth between the enemy Zerg and your Zerg, okay? Keep running back and forth. Because what you're doing is you're assessing your Zerg, the movement of your Zerg, and you're assessing the enemy Zerg and the movement of their Zerg. And then you're going to also notice the enemy has, say, 30 people right here. Okay, great. And then the next time you come and check their back line, you're like, wait, they only have 20 now. Where the fuck are the other 10? They moved somewhere. I have to find them. And that's when you start running around the back line of your Zerg and like a screen or two away from the back of your Zerg, or the flanks or the river that's next to your Zerg or whatever. And you're scouting those areas because you're probably going to get flanked, right? So understanding the enemy's positioning is very important to understanding if there was any shifts in the enemy positioning. This is why Armored Horse is very important. As a scout, very, 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 very often, I will run into the enemy mounted just so that I can run in and look at what they're doing, see how many they are, see how their positioning is, and then I'll run back out. And all I did was literally just look at what the enemy is doing. That's literally all I did. It's just look at what the enemy is doing, how they're postured, how many people they got. And then one day I'll look and be like, oh shit, they're missing a big chunk. There's a flank coming. I don't know where it is, but there's a flank coming, right? So now it's my job to start looking for that flank. So those are all little tips of what to do as a scout tank. If you're a scout tank and you're scouting an enemy blob that's like far away, you guys aren't fighting and you're just kind of far away. If you're going up to the enemy blob and you see that the first couple people that you look at, like popping your screen, are dismounted, turn the fuck around. Don't keep going closer, because you don't know if they're all mounted or all dismounted, and you're probably gonna die. If they are all dismounted, you're gonna die. Okay, like I said, they're out to get fucking scouts nowadays, so don't become a casualty. All right, so now to wrap it up, I know that was a lot. That was a lot to get through, man. There's a lot to talk about and unpack, but at the end of the day, the tanks, right, the Zerg's armor, you have to act like an iron wall, okay? You have to be alert, and this is for all tanks, okay? You have to be alert at all times. Don't wait for the caller to tell you to do your job. It is every single tank's responsibility to understand what the enemy is doing. Why? Because you're up in the front. And so you have direct eyes on the enemy at all times. So you need to learn how to assess the enemy. Okay, if that means that you go out every day and look at the enemy and see what they do right before they call engages, okay? If that's what you're doing, then pay attention. That's good. You're going to learn. You're going to get better. Don't just respond to what the enemy's doing. Learn to anticipate what they're going to do, Okay, put yourself in their shoes and say, if I was in their shoes, what would I do right now? Okay, once you start doing that actively in CVZs, you're going to continue to progress and get better over time. The next part is opportunity meets preparation. Okay, again, so after you understand what the enemy is doing, okay, because you're able to understand what their enemy is doing, you're able to counter it. Okay, because the enemy is going to present you with opportunities to stop them, to clump them, to whatever. Okay, the enemy is going to present you many opportunities, and those opportunities are the enemy's mistakes, right? And so when the enemy makes a mistake, they give you an opportunity to punish them for it. But if you're not prepared, then you can't meet that opportunity. Okay, so it's very important that opportunity meets preparation, because if you're not prepared, meaning you don't understand what the enemy is doing and you don't understand when they make a mistake, you're not able to discern when the enemy made a mistake versus when they're just walking around or doing whatever, okay? Then how are you going to be able to take the opportunity and punish them for their mistakes? You can't. This is why it's very important. Understanding how the enemy moves, understanding how the enemy plays, and every caller calls differently. So understanding how the enemy caller calls is also another important thing, right? There's something that a caller, especially newer callers, they tend to have very big tells, right? Newer callers tend to do one specific thing every time before they engage. Say, they might do a cartwheel. If they're like a soul side, they might do a cartwheel. Like they might cartwheel backwards or something. All right. And you might think, oh, no, that's stupid. I promise you, man. I promise you, the newer callers, they always have a specific tell. All right. And sometimes it might be as simple as the caller popped his night helm. Okay. Or sometimes it might be as simple as they threw their E or something. And sure, I mean, that'll work. But essentially, you have to understand how the enemy caller calls. And the last thing, or actually there's a couple more things. Another one is location. Okay. If you're out of position with any of your tank role, if you're out of position, you're literally just debuff for your Zerg. You might as well not be there. Okay. The reason is because if you're a clump tank and you're not in the front where you're supposed to, and you're not looking to get a clump and you're not ready to get a good clump, then you're just a debuff to your Zerg. If you're a disengaged tank and you're not in position to stop the enemy from engaging your Zerg, you're just debuff. Okay, these are all important things because you need to make sure you carry your weight. Tanks are the front line of the Zerg, and if the front line dies, the entire Zerg will die. It's very important that the tanks are understanding what you're supposed to do at all times and to achieve the job that the Zerg wants you to achieve. Another thing is sacrifice. Sacrifice sometimes is necessary as a tank. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you have to sacrifice yourself to ensure that the Zerg can live. Whether that means the Zerg gets to run away and live and keep their sets and you don't, or whether that means that you die on the first engage so that the rest of your Zerg can flood the enemy and kill them on the second engage. Okay? Sometimes it's worth it to die, but don't die for no reason. Okay? If you're dying for no reason, then maybe you're just bad. You're not sacrificing yourself for the greater good. Maybe you're just bad. Okay? Maybe you just need to get better. But understanding when the sacrifice on the field is important versus when you're just making a plain out mistake is very important to your progression. And the last thing is, don't forget about your black line. Just because you're the front line does not mean that you just look at the front line and just look at the enemy and never look at your Zerg. That's wrong. That's very wrong. Help your back line. If your back line is flooded, it doesn't matter if you're fucking holding a choke. I can't tell you how many tanks I've seen that are like holding a choke and they're like, yeah, I'm gonna hold this choke, and like the entire backline is flooded with enemies already, and they're like, I'm gonna hold the choke anyway because there's other people across the choke. And it's like, no, bro, you gotta help clean up the back line. If the back line is already flooded, what the hell are you holding? It doesn't matter what you hold. The enemy already got to your back line, right? So it's very important that tanks are not just focused on the enemy, but also every once in a while look back at your Zerg and make sure they're doing okay. Okay, it's very important to make sure that the health of the Zerg is good, and if again, don't tunnel vision. That's basically it. Don't tunnel vision. So that's it. That's pretty much it. That is all of it. My God, that was a lot. Do you guys feel like it was a lot? I feel like I just went on nonstop, man. That's woo. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Episode 10 is gonna be on Friday. Again, Saturday is gonna be a day off. I know the schedule says it. I'm not gonna change it because whatever. We already did the stream today. It don't matter anymore. But yeah, Saturday, day off. But Friday, we will be doing episode 10. That's gonna be the Zerg Spear. So with the Zerg Spear, we're gonna be doing the exact same thing that we did today, breaking down each individual role, the weapons, the armors, all of that, the positioning and tips for all of them. But for DPS, okay, we're gonna be doing it for DPS. And then the next Friday after that, it'll be episode 11, and that'll be the Zerg's Heart and Shield, and that we're gonna be talking about supports, and we're gonna be talking about healers, right? So that's gonna be the next week or so, week or two. Make sure you guys keep looking at. I believe episode 12 is gonna be the settings, the ZvZ settings, as well as tips. That's gonna be also a very important episode. That's in a couple weeks from now, but I want to make sure I let you guys know now, because a lot of you guys don't understand why your computer is getting so heated up with a fucking mobile game. All right. And it's probably because you have the wrong settings. But also, I'm going to be talking about all the mechanics that are fundamental to the game. They're very important. Very, 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 very important episode. If you don't watch any of the next 2 or 3, make sure you watch that one. It's extremely important because I'm going to be talking about focus fire. I'm going to be talking about resilience penetration. I'm going to be talking about how resistance potions work, how gigantic high potions work, and we're going to be looking at all of those things that really, really, really affect the entire gameplay. All right? So if you guys have any questions right now, drop them in the chat. If not, we're going to close it up. I'll give you guys a minute or so to talk in the chat, because I know it's delayed. All right, no questions. All right. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see you guys on Friday, same time. Wait. Dentist says, any thoughts on Great Arcane as a defensive tank? Great Arcane is great, man. Great Arcane is actually great. Arcane. All right. It's amazing. It's amazing. I think a lot of people are kind of just off Great Arcane because they nerfed it, and so every time that a weapon gets nerfed or fundamentally changed, everybody has like a downer on them. And they kind of just be like, oh, now it's just garbage. It's like, no, man. It's actually amazing. It's actually really, really, really strong. As a disengaged tank, it's very strong. I wouldn't really use it as a kite tank, but it can fulfill that role a little bit. But as a disengaged tank, it works well. Now, it wouldn't be a tank, right? It would be a support. But yeah, like as a support, because you would want to run like the cleanse on the W. And so you're going to be more of a disengage support as opposed to tank. It's the Bomb Squad Nullifier 5000. Yeah, man. Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's amazing. It's very, 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 very strong. And I think a lot of people are sleeping on it again because of the nerfs. So yeah, I think it's great. But then again, it's like many other things I've said that are great, right? But people just don't use them, man. People just don't use them. So all right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I'm going to put in the VOD into the YouTube channel in a few hours. It should be up probably by tomorrow, to be honest. Probably by tomorrow. So you, if somebody didn't watch it or whatever, you guys can let them know to head on over there. All right. Thank you, guys. I'll see you guys next time.